Thank you for joining episode 6, All in Your Head podcast.
Hey everyone, I'm Michelle. Alongside me, I have Tara Ray.
So, Tara, I'm kind of excited to talk about our topic today of emotion regulation, just because I think that if people understand this, their marriages would be better, their parenting would be better. So many things in their life would be better if they just had a few skills for how to regulate their emotions. What do you think about that?
I think that that's true. And I
Yeah,
can feel, I can speak from personal experience.
personal experience. Me too, because one of the things that I think was most helpful for me is just understanding that not everything can be an issue. When we're living with someone, especially when you live closely with someone, there has to be this constant asking ourselves, is this person more important to me than this thing I'm about to bring up? And if the answer is yes, then we just let it go. And
Mhm.
and then in the way that I guess that then on the other side of that is if we're letting too many things go and we find ourselves angry and resentful, then that means that we have to stand up and set boundaries with somebody in a kind, gentle, firm way. That's what I always tell people. It's got to be kind, gentle, firm in order for it to actually work. But
I used to say, lead with the love. The same thing, lead with the love.
lead
If
with
you
the
love
love.
this person, lead with that.
I like that. Lead with the love. We're going to have a t-shirt made that says lead with the love. I like it.
Yeah, lead with the love.
Lead with the love. I want that t-shirt. I do. I think it's a good one. But yeah, so really understanding that you can't go along and let yourself feel angry and resentful and just think that it's going to go away. You know, that a conversation is really imminent. If I'm feeling angry and resentful, then it's my responsibility to go and have a conversation so that I don't feel that way. So for me, regulating my emotions had a lot to do with paying attention to, did I feel angry and resentful about something enough that I needed to go have a conversation? Because I'm more of a let it go. I'll just let things go, sometimes too much. What about you?
I think for me, I let it go, but I don't let it go. So I
Okay.
might not say anything, but I'm harboring it. And then it's building and building and building. And then that's when I get to a point where you would see what I would call emotional dysregulation from me because I've let so much build up and then I just kind of snap and explode, for lack of a better word.
Right. And it's usually confusing to the other person when they watch that happen because they don't know, they don't see the building up of something.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden there's this big explosion and it's confusing,
Mm-hmm.
on the other end. We're going to talk more about this in some future episodes when we talk about parenting. So you guys stick with us on our channel because we're going to be talking about parenting in a few weeks. And we got some good information about that too. But just, yeah, so in order to regulate emotions the way that it's taught with the skills from dialectical behavior therapy, which is a therapy I really love, it was dialectical behavior therapy created by Marsha Linehan. And she created it for people with something called borderline personality disorder. But the skills that she came up with work for pretty much anybody that's got, issues with this kind of build up, explode thing.
How do you teach emotion regulation? So I developed an entire module of strategies for regulating emotions. And those strategies have been taken from the science of emotions and from the evidence-based treatments that treat emotions. If we had a person who had a treatment for one emotion, I simply looked at what do those therapists tell that patient to do, and then I repackaged all that as a skill. I would have to say about half of my patients, if you ask them how they feel, what their emotion is, they're functioning like they're looking in a fog. They look down and they think, I have no idea. They have no idea what their emotion is. So the first thing we have to do is teach them how to do that. And we have strategies which are very effective for that. And then we have to teach them how to regulate. So there are many strategies for regulation. You can look at the vulnerability factors. So often you're very emotional today because of something that happened yesterday, because you didn't sleep, because you didn't eat, because of some stress from yesterday. So one of the things we look at is what are the factors that make you vulnerable to being emotional, and how can you change those factors? So we look at that. We look at what is the prompting event, meaning what happened right before. Is that something that you can change? If you can, that would be teaching problem solving. If you can't change it, we go to the next, which is what's your interpretation or what's your thoughts about that. We have a skill called check the facts. How do you check the facts to see if your interpretations are correct? So on and on. I mean, there are a lot of different sub-skills in emotion regulation. We know that emotion regulation skills are effective. We've got data on just that all by itself. They are effective in teaching people how to regulate emotions.
Thing. And what she says is that there needs to be a constant asking ourselves, is this thing, how do I want to feel about myself, or how do I want this person to feel about me, and which is more important? Like, if it's something I can't let go, and I'll know that because I'm still going to feel angry days later, which means that it isn't something I was successful at letting it go. Therefore, I'm responsible for bringing it up in a kind way. And that's how I would regulate my emotions rather than build up, explode, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I had to learn that and learn when to do that. And sometimes I couldn't even pay attention to when I was feeling resentful because I just had not been good at paying attention to that, nor had I been good at understanding my own feelings. So I used to journal. And if I felt like, if I noticed in my writing that something was coming up more than a couple days later, then I knew it was something that bothered me enough that I couldn't just let it go and I needed to say something. And that's how I learned to teach myself to not let things build, but instead to come forward with them at the right time. So that's kind of what emotion regulation means to me. What about for you?
I think for me, I call it an internal peace meter. And when that feels off, I can't stop until I find out the source of what's causing it to feel off. So I'll, and it could be anything, but I know that I have a tendency to do what I call stack. So it can be one thing, but then as other things come in, they get kind of stacked up on top of each other. And the original issue kind of gets buried. And because of that, I really listen to that internal peace meter. And I'll start to unstack. I'll have to, or else I'm a person, because I'm a person who's more anxious, who has had difficulty emotionally regulating. And we'll talk about what that looks like a little bit later, but I know. And so because I want to keep myself from getting to that point, I'll take the time I need to unstack. And it could be anything, but once I do that unstacking process, then it's like, oh, I found the root of it. Let me deal with this. And for me, it's mostly, I call them themes. I always look for the theme. So it's not specifically what happened, but it's what that thing meant to me. Mm. So if somebody cut me off in traffic, just to say, this is a far-fetched example, but if someone did that, it means something more to me than they cut me off in traffic. It probably means that I feel disrespected by what they did or something like that. And so the theme for me is disrespect. And that's typically what I'm reacting to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you kind of unpack things and put them in a theme, and then you're able to figure out, I'm reacting to this because I'm feeling this thing.
Mm-hmm. And then that helps me, if I have to have a conversation, be able to articulate what my issue is, because that used to get lost in the process also. I would get anxious and then I would be talking about 50 different things and never getting to the point. So I had to start to do that unpacking process and that identifying the theme, and then I could better articulate what was going on with me.
Oh, fantastic. Now, I think that one of the things that helped me a lot with this too was learning to identify what my emotions are. Like sometimes I couldn't put a word to them. So, like kind of what you're talking about, unpacking that, trying to figure out exactly what they are. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I know that in a lot of, like drug and alcohol recovery is what I did a lot of before I moved to Georgia. And we would have a feelings wheel, where people could get at it when we were talking in groups or even in a session and someone couldn't identify their feelings, they would look at the wheel and it would help them to kind of identify what it is exactly they were feeling. And it takes work to figure that out. Like, what am I feeling and what's the word for it? And I think that a counselor can certainly help somebody figure that out because it's not an easy process. But being able to, what we call emotional intelligence, which again, we're going to talk about in the parenting episode as well, but being able to intelligently articulate emotions, that's a tough one. Don't you think?
Because because I work with a lot of kids, I think what I talk to a lot of parents about is more complex emotions. Kids are not as they can't regulate those emotions as readily as adults, and they can't identify them. So working on that. So I'll say a lot of depressed kid is typically a kid that looks very angry, but they can't process what's making them feel depressed or the feelings of sadness. So that looks like anger, because anger is a lot easier to express than sadness, depression, or not really knowing, but just knowing I don't feel good right now.
Right. Right. And I know it's a little simplistic, but as I was teaching myself to identify my emotions, underneath anger, I was told it was either some sort of pain or frustration. And so would try to figure out which one it was and allow myself to feel the pain or the frustration instead of the anger. In fact, that's really good for anger management kind of things too, is to know that it's not, anger isn't the first emotion often. There's something underneath it.
Thank you for joining us for It's All in Your Head podcast. Remember to subscribe, like, share, and please comment. Whatever mental health questions you have, we will be happy to answer them in future podcasts. So I think also getting into this process of talking about how we emotionally regulate, we have to be able to know how to start the process. And what I typically say to people is give yourself permission to be the most important part of the equation. So if you would typically take a back seat or stuff something because you don't want to upset someone, or you just don't want the conflict, or whatever it could be, if you think of yourself as important in the process, you might make a different decision. And it's not that you would automatically 100%, but it's a good possibility you could make a different decision, and it helps you start to take care of yourself throughout this process so that you can better emotionally regulate.
Okay, I like that. Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about the other thing too that I used to do a lot of was not to let myself feel. In fact, the more intensive feeling was, the less I wanted to feel it. And I would kind of stuff it in, like you're talking about stuffing it into. What I tell my clients is that they're stuffing it into a pressure cooker that's going to blow the lid at some point. And so you want to make sure that instead of leaning away from our emotions, that we lean toward them and really let ourselves feel each one. Because the interesting thing is that they're really not that bad if you let yourself feel them. They get stronger for about 30 seconds. It's like a big wave. So for 30 seconds, the wave comes to a crest and then it literally just disappears. The wave just crests. And so as you feel that strong emotion, just know that if I sit in this for about 30 seconds, it's just going to crest like a wave. And people just become really good at surfing their emotions. Now, if they had certain things growing up where they were allowed to feel emotions in their home, and in fact encouraged to lean in and feel those things. People do this automatically. If you weren't encouraged like that, and that isn't the climate you were raised in, and instead you tend to pull away or stuff them, it's a little bit harder to lean into that emotion and really let yourself feel it. But it's possible. At first it feels scary because they get big for a minute, but if you just sit there, it just disappears, it just breaks. And so I think that's an important thing to help people understand too, is leaning into the emotion rather than away from it.
Mhm. I call it more of like a controlled explosion or a controlled thing. So if you have a balloon and you blow it up, if you slowly let the air out, you're fully in control. But if you have one of those balloons, you blow it up and you just let it go, you know how you see the balloon and it's all over the place? That's how it is when you don't emotionally regulate. And I talk about, I know that feeling because that used to be me. I mean, that losing it is just a reality. And when I say lose it, it's throwing things, screaming and yelling, like the whole 9 yards. And it was just like, okay. And then after it's all done, I'm tired, but I feel better. Why? Because you just acted up and you let it all out. But if I had controlled it and let it out slow, I would have had the same end result. So learning that, it took me some time, but learning that helped me to get better at it over the years. And then it helped me to look for that opposed to the opposite. Now and that's not to say that I'm perfect. I threw some last week, but I'm not perfect, but I'm better. And I know that what I know for me, especially being a person who has anxiety, that those explosions were kind of like a defense mechanism that would keep me from, it's like you've gotten too close, you've touched the nerve, and now that's it. I don't want you to touch any more nerves. And it was just to get that to stop. And it was another way of not leaning fully into the emotions that I expected to feel, if that makes sense. I don't want to feel extreme sadness, so I'm going to do something to stop from getting there.
Right, right. So as you talked about the balloon, letting go of it and it going all over, I could see you throwing things and looking. I could see those two pictures together. It was pretty funny. I'm sorry to laugh at your emotions, but it was pretty funny.
No, it is funny. And I have to laugh at it now because I know what it was like. And I would know what the faces would look like after it was over. And usually my husband is the recipient of this. And so he will try, like he'll say, he will try to do whatever he can to stop it. He does not want it to get there. So he's like, whatever I have to do, we're gonna, this is not going any further than this. And it was like, okay, but then I use him as a mirror. So that actually helps me. This just came because it's true. I might not realize how I'm getting, but because he's seen it, he knows. And I can tell by his face or his reaction that it's getting to the point where I'm feeling a little bit like I'm out of control, even if I don't recognize it right away. So it's good to have somebody like that as a gauge who can just be like, hey, it's okay, which is what I think he'll do sometimes. Okay.
So the way that it helps is you watch his face, you kind of go, oh, I'm out of control. And then you can bring yourself back in control. Yep. And then his calmness helps you.
It does. He does not poke the bear.
Thank you for joining It's All in Your Head podcast. I just want to remind you to subscribe, like, share, and comment below. Thank you.
He does not do that. Where, no, I said, because he knows in the past that hasn't worked.
I was going to say, I think what makes a good marriage good is knowing what buttons a person has and then never pushing them. And that's kind of the rules. If you want to say there are rules there, that would be a rule, is knowing what really irritates your partner and never doing it because you care enough about them to stay away from that trigger.
Right.
Now, I know I've seen marriages where the opposite is true, but if you want it to be good, that would be how you would do it. And I loved how you said that, because I think that some couples have said to me before that they try to make sure that it's not both of them out of control at the same time, that they only one gets to do it at a time, you know, because somebody's got to be the calm voice of reason. And it's interesting how when if I know I'm the calm one in the situation, I can shift right into calm. Why can't I do that all the time? You know? And I asked myself that one time, if I know that I have to be the calm one, why don't I just be the calm one all the time? You know? And you're right, it is anxiety driven. And I can tell when my anxiety is up because I'm more irritable and I'm a little bit more you know, tend to yell. I don't yell as much anymore. Like you said, we kind of outgrow these things. But yeah, there was a time in my life where I did the same thing, that I would be the one that would be yelling and screaming. And the people around me were always the one that were the brunt um, of all of that and the damage that I created. And I think one of the best things that I loved, I mentioned, I think in one of our previous episodes about how I used to work in a 12-step program for one of my internships, but I didn't have a drug or alcohol problem and I didn't feel qualified. And my clinical director told me that I had personality issues that were probably addictions. And needing to control, anger can be an addictive behavior, superiority can be an addictive behavior. And I just took all of these addictive behaviors and put them through a 12-step program. And I know that when I came to the part with making amends, especially to my children, a lot of it was making amends for not knowing how to regulate my emotions, for not being that calm source of peace in our home that I'm sure that every kid, you know, hopes that they can grow up with, but I just wasn't able to be that. And that's where a lot of my amends came from. But like you said, I didn't know I had anxiety at the time. And I didn't get diagnosed with it until my oldest daughter was 17. My youngest was 6. So the older kids, you know, have a different experience of me than the younger ones do as well.
Yeah, absolutely the same. Absolutely the same experience.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for It's All in Your Head podcast. This is episode 6, Emotional Regulation. I'm Tara Ray, and I'm here with Mishele Walker. So I'd like to say, just in thinking about how you can start to be better emotionally regulated, I'm not going to say perfect, but better, there's some steps you can think about. And again, the main one, I think, is to allow yourself to be important in the process. You can also make sure you allow yourself to feel what's going on, identify the theme that's underlying. So it's not just the instance, but what does this thing mean to you? Give it voice after you identify it. And you just remember, you're not going to be perfect in the process, that this is a learning process, and eventually it just gets better over time.
Good. I love those. So mine are a little bit similar, but a little bit different too. But the first thing I feel is important is to decide if the person is more important than the thing you're about to bring up, because so many things really should be let go that are just not that important. The second one, like you said, really lean toward the emotions rather than away. Allow yourself to feel it, ride that wave. And then a third would be to, if a boundary is needed, just learn to set kind, gentle, firm boundaries. And then the fourth one I would say is, if you need something, ask for it, that people cannot read your mind. Just have the courage to ask for what you need. So that would be my set of tips.
Thank you for joining us for It's All in Your Head podcast. And remember,
Mental health matters.
and if you don't deal with your stuff, it's going to deal with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.